Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of VOX VOMITUS. I'm your host, Jennifer Ann Gordon, the author of the Kindle Award-winning novel Beautiful, Frightening, and Silent, as well as Pretty Ugly and The Japanese Box and Other Stories. Joining me today, as always, is my VOX VOMITUS vixen, Allison Martine, author of The Bourbon Books, which includes Dibs Since September, Move On Melinda, and Climb the Salmon Ladder. Joining us today from Illinois is Kimberly Garrett Brown, author of Cora's Kitchen. Welcome to VOX VOMITUS, Kimberly.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
You won't be after a few minutes.
Hopefully our internet cooperates better because mine's doing some exciting things, and I think I made it stop. But if the opening was more chorused than it should have been, that's weird stuff going on. So
it's weird. That's okay. That's all right. We're live. This is the price we pay for being live podcasters. So, Kimberly, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay.
We read your bio. You have a very impressive bio. And tell us a little bit about Cora's Kitchen.
after I'd be right side up.
Oh, I love it. I love seeing that. Let's see. So, as you said, I live in just outside of Chicago in a town called Glen Ellen. I am also the editor and the publisher and editor of a women's literary press, which is called Minerva Rising. So we publish books and that kind of thing too, but books and online magazine. And let's see, what else can I say? I love photography, and I am a book. What do they call the book people now? Our bibliophiles, like
bibliophiles makes us sound very fancy instead of like the good old bookworm from.
We're book dragons, and we hoard books, and that's okay because dragons are allowed to hoard things.
I am. I love books. I love shoes.
All the important things.
And purses, and so yeah, those are three things that I never can seem to get enough of. And
I would like to have like a library, but also like shoes and purses all in the same room, all beautiful shelves filled with books, shoes, purses. And for me, I have a weakness for dresses and costumes.
Oh, well, and
it's
if
a problem.
Put a little great wine bar in there for me too, then I'm like, whew, I'm in heaven.
Your family would never see you again. You would just go in that room and just be like, goodbye, world.
Yeah, it's always funny to me.
Space. Bye.
It's always funny when we're at the mall, or particularly like Nordstrom's, and my husband will call me and he'll go, where are you? And I'm like, really? You really?
Do you not know where to check?
You have to ask. So I can always be found in the shoe department. So.
I was going to say shoes and purses. They aren't even usually too far apart.
No.
Accessories, shoes, find me there.
And I cannot, for a variety of reasons, I cannot leave a bookstore without buying a book. I
feel rude if I don't purchase something, like I'm being a bad patron. And what if I'm not supporting a local bookstore? Then I'm required to buy something. It's in the law.
Exactly. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. So I feel really passionate too. I mean, on the more serious side, I'm passionate about writing, and I'm passionate about women, supporting women, encouragement, women empowerment, which is part of the reason why I started Minerva Rising, which is the literary press that I run. So that's me in a nutshell.
We're here for that.
So before we get to Cora's Kitchen, how long have you been running? You said it's Minerva Press.
Minerva Rising Press is the name of it. It's been 12 years, which is kind of crazy.
Wow.
Okay. And that it's still going, because you hear about so many places that start up and it's like, it's great. And we just heard news a couple days ago about another place shutting down that had been around that long. I'm trying to remember, but a lot of them, it's like strong start and it doesn't quite get everything lined up. And then,
after I started it, I thought I maybe should have taken tennis lessons or something. Because
were you like, I just need a hobby. I'm going to start a publishing house.
That is not a hobby. We tell you that.
Clearly,
it's a way of life.
It's not a hobby, but it's, what I love about it is that, like I said, I'm passionate about books and women's stories, and just some of the things that I've had the opportunity, the women that I've met over the last 12 years, the chapbooks that we've published, it feeds me in a different way. Like I was working with an author yesterday on her book, which we were hoping it was going to come out in June, but it's not. but just reading the story and how those stories just become a part of you and speak to you, and I love it. And one other little thing, because I'm I always hate saying this, but it's true. Like, I'm middle aged.
We all are.
Embrace it now.
We're like, oh, now that we're of a certain age.
There should be a sexier way to say that than middle age. But
they say like mature women, but then it sounds like we're in the adult section, if you know what I mean. Like, I don't mean mature audiences kind of thing, but we are experienced.
Exactly.
I mean, I agree. There should, if we're three writers, we should come up with a sexier term for
old. I'm still mad. I was talking to one of my friends about the age I had my various children and trying to figure something out. And I'm like, yes, my two later babies were considered advanced maternal age and a geriatric pregnancy. So we can definitely work on better terms for what we call women who are not 20 anymore.
Yeah, I mean, my daughter-in-law, which, I mean, when she had her, my two grandchildren, she was like 35 or 36, and she was like a geriatric mother. I'm like,
yep. Rude.
How is that
Rude.
geriatric? But
no, when I was in my 30s, I was still a baby.
Right. True. But anyway, I bring that up because one of the things that is also, has been inspiring me with Minerva Rising is that so many of the stories that we read or Hollywood is about like these women in their 20s or 30s. And as we know, like, I wish I could go back sometime and talk to Kim in her 30s and say, girl, I'm obsessing over that shit. It doesn't, excuse me, I don't know if I can say that.
Oh, you can say shit. Yeah.
But
like, oh yeah, you got.
Like, it's not a big deal. Just let it go, but the stories and the awakenings that we've had once we've raised our children and we're able to embrace either a career or a hobby or whatever it is, like, just to fully be yourself. I mean, I think this is a great age for women, and I like having the opportunity with the press to celebrate that.
I love that. And Annie McDonald says, embrace the sexy age. And I like that. And, you could have done that with tennis lessons, but you probably wouldn't be connecting with those deeper stories with at least a tennis ball, unless you're doing like some kind of Tom Hanks Castaway and it's just you and the tennis ball for a really long time. I don't think anybody would want that. I think you're better off with the other.
And
you're better off with
I don't think I'd be very good at that. I mean,
being alone or the tennis part?
The tennis part.
Yes.
Okay. I can handle the alone time, but the tennis, hand-eye, I have none. I played soccer for years, so I have eye-foot coordination, no hand-eye coordination at all. Like, no.
I love the sound. I mean, I love the sound of when the tennis ball hits the center of the. Like, I love that, the funk of that. But
but maybe not enough to take lessons.
Yeah,
maybe just go to a tennis game
or the ASMR of just. Kimberly puts on the headphones and it's just tennis balls.
Like,
very satisfying. I love it.
So talk to us a little bit about your Cora's Kitchen and like the journey of it, because like you said, this book came out 2 years ago.
2022. Yeah.
It's won some awards. But then when I was reading your bio and it said it won an award back in 2016. So tell us this journey.
So it was actually it was my master's, my creative thesis for my MFA. Nice. Not that far from where you live, Jennifer. I went to Goddard, which is in Vermont.
Love it.
And that was part of it. Was you have to create a creative thesis based on whatever it is that your specialty is. And so mine was fiction. And so it started then. So I actually started Cora's Kitchen back in 2009, if you can believe it. I
always tell people it took me 30 years to write my first book because I started the idea a million years ago and it just took a long time for me to make it into a book.
Yeah, I mean, that is the thing of it. Like, you think, it always kills me when people say, oh, well, sometimes when I get a chance, I'm just going to sit down and write a book. And I'm like, okay. Okay.
All right, you do that.
Yeah, have a good time.
Tell me how that works out.
Yeah. But so anyway, it started off as my creative thesis. And once I finished graduate school, I did end up entering it into a couple of contests. One was the William Faulkner, I can't remember the whole name, but a William Faulkner Wisdom Words or whatever, where it was a novel in process, because my mentor, Rosemary Daniel, had said, Kim, you should enter this. And so I entered it. So it was it got shortlisted for a novel in process then. And then when I finished it, after how many revisions, when I finished it and I sent it again, it was a finalist then for that. And also for, I forget what Louise Meriwether book of the book contest. It was one of 5. So that was really exciting and encouraging. So that was sort of in the beginning, and the road to publishing,
is like, fraught.
Yes, it is.
It's a thing.
It's a journey.
It really is.
Sometimes it never stops.
Yeah.
But I love that you had an award in process, and how encouraging to be told, keep going. This is something worth pursuing. And was it always something, because one of the interesting things about Cora's Kitchen, for those who haven't read it, is it's not fully epistolary, but it has a lot of letters in it. So you've got these correspondences between Cora and then Langston Hughes, which I'm going, I don't think those are real. And I was really thinking, I'm like, was this a real person? So it was one of those things where you maybe had to stop and think, was there such a person? No, okay, this is all creatively imagining history and having this real historical figure interact. But then there are short stories, or not short stories, but there are short parts of the story that are told just in verse, as opposed to all letter form. So it's not full letters, but I don't know if I've read a hybrid like that. Like I've read ones that are all letters and then read ones that are not, but I haven't seen ones that are a hybrid this way. Was it always like that, or did that evolve over time when you were working through it?
I think it was always like that. And how it worked out was, it didn't, as you know, because you're both authors. Cora's Kitchen didn't start off as an epistolary novel. It started off as, your typical novel. And because I was in grad school when I was working on it, there was a scene that I wrote where she was sitting in a park writing in her journal. And I remember my advisor saying, how they can be sometimes. She's like, well, I really feel like she needs to be doing something. She can't just be sitting there writing. That's not, no one really wants to read that. And I kind of thought to myself, but it was the writing that was important to me.
Yeah.
And so then I kind of thought, well, maybe what I should do is write what she's writing in the journal, and kind of do it that way. And so that was how it kind of became an epistolary novel. And I'm quite the journaler. When I was in sixth grade, it was the diary, but then then
once you get to a mature age, we call them journals.
We call them journals, and we're not, dear diary, today this boy looked at me and I hate him. And I wanted to know what epistolary is, and it just means epistle. It means letters. So it's one of those words that literary terms and also Bible scholars throw around a lot, because these are the epistles. That's the only reason I know it.
And I know Annie has epistolary work that she's written, and I've read it. Annie is another fellow writer.
Annie's baiting us to explain things. She's like, yes, and now here's a link to my book. Annie, you can put it in the comments. It's fine. But yeah, that flow between a journal and wanting to read a journal entry versus, she's actually corresponding with someone else and what she's going to say and what she isn't. And I like the flow between her letters to Langston and then her reflecting on letters back, going, I don't know how I feel about what he said to me or what his guidance is, because
he had a lot of opinions.
We're like, Langston, we've heard enough of you. Let
I know. At first I was like, Langston's dreamy. And then sometimes I'm like, he's a little judgy.
And you know what? It's funny that you said that, because when I was researching and writing the novel, I read a lot. You'd have to, to take on a historical person.
And get their voice. Yeah.
Read a lot of letters written by him, read his biographies, his books, his poetry, just kind of completely immersed in that. And when I started it, I was like, he's such a great poet. And I like, da, da, da. And
you had a crush on Langston. It's okay. We all did.
No, absolutely. By the time I finished Cora's Kitchen, I was like, ugh.
Crush dissolved.
Because there were just parts of him and things that he wrote or opinions that he had that I still think he's, as far as as a poet, he's still dreamy, if you want to say that. But I no longer had that crushy type thing on him when I finished that.
Like, if I was Cora, these letters would be a lot steamier.
Right, exactly. But
and Earl would be confiscating the letters, being like, dear, you're not writing to this man anymore. No, none of that. Mm-mm.
So that was, and then in terms of the other pieces, like the short stories that are in there, because even before I went back to get an MFA, I already had a master's in written communications, and I taught at a liberal arts college outside of Chicago for many years. So the value of teaching writing was also important to me. And so in writing this, I thought that if she and Langston were going to be talking about books and writing, then we also needed to see her journey as a writer in the process. And that's where the short stories or stories that are in there that she's working on are kind of this, it's sort of giving the reader the idea of what a writer goes through to actually.
I liked that you included some of her false starts.
Yes. This is not where the story begins, or who is my protagonist. I loved those.
Yeah. Who is my protagonist? What are her hopes and dreams? I liked it when you would start like a paragraph of a story and then have her look at it and go, yeah, that's not good.
Like, I don't want to do this.
We've all done that.
Right.
You write something, and as you're writing it, you're just like, that was great. Next day, read it back over, and you're like,
what the heck?
Are those even sentences?
I'm not sure this qualifies as the English. Let's put that back and try again. It gave me I feel so privileged that I have a computer where I can just type new stuff rather than she's sitting there, she's having to write by hand, or then later she's using typewriters, and imagining having to create entire stories that way. I'm going, I really like my computer, please cooperate.
I spent a lot of time last night thinking about that, just like thinking about the writers of our past and how you really had to probably, because rewriting was such a pain in the ass, like think about every word you're putting on this paper, and not just us, just like, I can write a whole bunch of, word vomit and fix it later. It'll be easy. I can just delete it all.
Or have to retype it.
Or one of the things, because I write a lot, sometimes longhand, and sometimes my handwriting is not legible. And so I'm like, I think this is really good, but I can't
but what did I write?
I can't figure out what this says.
Yeah, mine's pretty bad. And you said your daughter is a doctor or training to be an orthopedic surgeon. So therefore, she probably inherited that bad handwriting for you. So she's off to a great start of illegible doctor's orders. But I know mine's terrible as well. And I know I see sometimes people will post their like, oh, look, I was writing a story. I'm like, you write with a pen? I'm lucky if I can find a pen to sign my kid's permission slip for something. Normally it's typing or it's nothing. And that's honestly part of my process is part of the typing. It's like these things are all connected, and occasionally I get interrupted and need to go somewhere and I'll do voice to type. And even then I'm like, okay, well, somebody replaced this with a goblin, and the goblin was talking for a while because this is also not English and it's just gibberish in there. Jennifer's gotten my message. She knows most of my messages are kind of gibberish. But I
find I write different things in different ways. So if I'm writing poetry, I write it by hand. If I'm writing a story or a novel, I'm on my computer. If I'm writing like flash or essays, I do a lot of that on like a free writer.
What's a free writer?
You like that?
Well, mine's really old. It's a Neo 2 from like the early 2000s.
The ones with like kid computers that are like
it's basically
typewriter with a little tiny screen.
Yep, tiny little screen. I like it if I'm doing writing bursts or writing prompts and things like that, because it doesn't let me edit right away. So I don't spend a lot of time going, oh, I can make that sentence better. It's just, it comes out, then I hook it up to my computer, and then I can deal with it from there.
Oh, I like that.
I've been contemplating buying one for like way longer than I care to share. And I'm on the new kick right now, this week, about buying one. And I was like,
I love it. And I'll bring it on vacation instead of bringing my laptop, because I'm like, am I really going to write on vacation? I always think I'm going to. I never do.
Do you?
Every once in a while, but but not.
Well, I would
usually.
imagine with the free writer, you can, because I mean, sometimes with your laptop or even an iPad, it opens the gate to everything else when you
Exactly.
Me.
Yeah. Then all of a
It's
sudden you're just
bothering her.
scrolling Instagram or, you know, and you're just like, oh, and the
Or
free
your
writer
friends bothering
forces you to write.
You cannot be getting on your messenger and typing to your friends about how hard writing is when it's like, how about you stop texting me and just write? I'd rather talk to you about writing. But I do love that this includes her process and including somebody else telling her, oh, well, you should focus on these themes. And I know that right now that's a really big thing in the publishing world is writers being told, and I'm talking to lots of writers who are in the submission trenches, query trenches, people being told, you're from this background, you need to write this kind of story. We want to see this kind of story. And people saying, but I want to write this kind of story, or I want to represent characters of my background this way or not that way. And I felt like Langston was doing that to a certain extent to Cora. It's like, you should be writing this way. And she's like, can I just write for me? Yeah, no, I'm not ready.
What you said is really, really true. I mean, the idea that you've got to write from the heart. Like if you can't write from the heart, if you can't write about something that's important to you, then I think it's flat and it doesn't touch you. What is it? I don't know who it is that says that saying that says no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. That is true. Like you've got to feel it. And I'm not able to, I don't know, maybe there are people that can. I can't write speculative. Like you can't say, Kim, write this. And which is one of the reasons why I don't do ghostwriting or which is maybe too bad because I have
there's money there.
I have a friend who she actually, and I don't know if I can say who she wrote, but anyway, she wrote a celebrity's autobiography.
Yeah, I have a friend who also, he for a while was writing a lot of sports people's biographies.
Yeah,
autobiographies, and he's like, but under contract, can't mention their names, and I'm like, can I guess?
I want to know. And then you're just guessing random celebrities. You're like, does their name rhyme with? And like, stop guessing, Jennifer. You're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, that's just like we had a chef for my birthday, and she was saying that she signed a non-disclosure. Yeah. But she couldn't say which celebrity she worked with. But she said, I just will say something about wedding dresses. And so, so my husband is like, okay, that don't mean anything to me, but I'm like totally fair wing.
I know. Like, I just got chills. I'm just like,
but
it's Vera Wang. It's not Vera. It could be Vera Wang, or it could be anybody who I don't know got married, because that's actually where my brain went. Like it was a celebrity who had a high profile wedding. I'm like, it's Kate Middleton, it's Meghan Markle, and you're like, no, it's actually someone who designs the dresses, not who just wore it once and got that. It was funny though, because you say that's why I can't write speculative, and I'm like speculative, and then you're using the term speculative as in like you're writing it for someone else, writing it like intellectual property or writing.
And I think Allison and I's first thought was like,
because I write speculative fiction as in science fiction, fantasy, and it's horror is included in that too. And I'm like, oh, I can totally do that. But I'm like, you mean it as something completely different. And fortunately, I have not experienced a lot of the things that go on in my books because some weird shit happens in them. And I don't think I would be all right if those things had happened to me in real life. But
you enjoy that genre, you enjoy that.
Yeah. And I still pour all of me into it. So like my stories are still being told through those lenses. So it's still very much there. It's just being told on a stage where things happen that can't happen in real life. So
that would be fun. I wish I could. I can't do that either, but I wish I could. So there's a part of me that wish I could write. I actually started this short story a while back where I was trying to dabble in that. And it was really kind of fun because sometimes I get sort of mired in, I'll call it reality or the way things, I've experienced things or know of people that have experienced things. And I had such a good time, like kind of playing in that area. So
free yourself of like, okay, so reality says it has to happen like this, but does it?
It doesn't. No. It doesn't have to. But I mean, I also liked in Cora's Kitchen how you really talked about, that beginning writer when she kept saying like, I don't have time to write. Like, when am I supposed to do this? Mm-hmm. I feel selfish. I should be cleaning the house. Mm-hmm. I should be like
playing with my children.
Playing with my children. I should be talking to my husband. I should be.
Right,
But instead,
right.
it's like, I've got to do this. And that's not necessarily just a woman thing, but I liked how much you explored that for her.
Well, you explored it, and also because Langston was coming at her, and she's like, he doesn't get it because he doesn't have the same responsibilities and connections she does, and doesn't have the same abilities and not abilities, but the same requirements.
Luxuries.
Well, and it's true. And it's funny because sometimes we hear about people who wrote a book after, I'm trying to remember who it was. I want to say it was Pierce Brown, who's like, oh, I went to my parents' chalet for 6 months to write this book. And I'm like, that's interesting. And we've talked about how long things took for us, and whether it's because we're marinating over ideas, Jennifer, or because we didn't have that time in our schedules because we had day-to-day life requirements. I joke my first book that went and died on submission was written over multiple years because it wasn't until my youngest went to preschool that I had long enough blocks of time where I wasn't completely sleep deprived. And some people were like, well, if writing really matters to you, you'll find a way. I'm like, yeah, but if you're completely sleep deprived, the writing that you come out with is just going to be the back to my goblin gibberish that no one's going to really want to read. So
absolutely.
I'm doing this, and I like, it was kind of surprising to me because with this title, Cora's Kitchen, I was thinking, okay, so she's a cook or she's this. It's like, she's a librarian when this all starts. So she's someone who has that love. And then because of family obligations, finds herself in this other position where she's like, I have an education. What am I doing over here? And I think some of us have felt those kind of things at times. And the idea that certain jobs below us, or like, I've worked hard for this, so why am I doing this other thing? But then it opened up other opportunities that she wouldn't have had, some of which may have led to places maybe she didn't want to be. But that's, later in the story. But I love that she finds these things, and it's not just like, oh, yes, she's just a cook and she's doing this over here. It's like, no, she loves reading and she loves learning. She met Langston because she didn't judge people when they came into the library and just assume about them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely.
How much research and how long of a research process did this take? Because obviously it takes place in 1928. Am I correct?
Yes.
You did a lot of research on Langston. But it's not just Langston. You talk about a lot of other authors of that time period, and also people in society at that time. Mm-hmm. So, like, are you somebody who really likes researching?
Jennifer's like looking at you like, what kind of person are you that likes that?
And I like that there was a stall. She's like, did I like researching?
I guess I enjoy some aspects of research. I enjoy the hunt, if you will. Yes. Just in terms of finding out. I've always been drawn to history. I always say this, I probably would have been a history major had it not been for Professor Tennyson.
Tell us more.
Tell us more about this person.
How awful were they? Are they still alive? Are we slandering them?
I don't know.
I know. I was like, should we?
No, if he is alive, I guarantee you he is not on the internet.
He doesn't know how the internet works.
I went to the University of Michigan for undergraduate, and he was the first. I took a history of the medieval times, which basically them like the Renaissance of the 1500s or the 15th century, and I loved that period of time, and he was so boring. Like
you're making me hate something I love,
like ears and eyes. Like I hate it. Like. I was like, how can you take this period that I love and just make me hate it in history? But all of that to say that one thing that's beauty about historical fiction is that I get to read about history and learn about things like that without, getting into all the stuff you get into when you major in the history. Mm-hmm. So in doing Cora's Kitchen, it was fun to sort of unravel the things that were of interest to me. Like I said, I always liked the 20s. I was drawn to the Harlem Renaissance and the 20s as a time period. So I did a lot of reading of books that were published during during that time from the beginning of 1920 to 1935, I think is the years, but or 1931 or something like that. But of the times when those books from the Harlem Renaissance were published. So I read those books. I read did research just about the 20s and what was popular, what books were popular, and what people were doing, and not only reading novels, but also reading research that was written about that. So it gives you like this well-rounded idea about what was going on during that time period, because there's so many things that we take for granted about how things are.
Yeah.
That wasn't necessarily the case, in the 1920s, or gosh, 100 years ago almost.
Yeah.
When
Why
you
did
say
you
it
do
like
that?
that.
I know,
Oh,
that crazy.
no.
Well, and you mentioned so some of the other novels that were written then, there are a lot of short stories mentioned in here, because Cora is talking about these other stories that won. I'm assuming those are real stories that
Absolutely.
she's. So I'm assuming you had to read those to be able to pull out elements of them to talk
So
about.
like she mentions, I think it's called The Typewriter by Dorothy West.
Yeah.
And it, and I can't remember the name of the story that Zora Neale Hurston read, but I actually read, short stories by Dorothy West. Was a part of. She was she was young, and so she was like the youngest person, kind of during the Harlem Renaissance. But I read short story collections by her. Zora Neale Hurston, not only what we know, Their Eyes Are Watching God, but she also has short story collections and other books and an autobiography. Like reading all of that, so you get like a sort of more holistic idea of what that time period was like. And if you think about it, as writers, we always are talking about other books. So you can't talk to a writer about writing and not talk about the books that are being written at the time. And so
I'm always suspect when I meet a writer who says they don't read.
I don't
I'm
want
like,
to read anything written by a writer who doesn't read, because then it just tells me either they think that it's not worth their time, or that they're better than the other writers out there, which is just kind of ridiculous. Like, how would you even know if you haven't read them? But I've talked to different people who are everything from, well, I don't have time, or I have ADHD and I can't focus on stuff. And it's like, okay, you might have different excuses why it doesn't work for you very well, but there's so many different ways to access books now, especially with audiobooks, that it's like, are you sure you just don't think that it's something you want to pursue? I'm always like, you got to be reading what's out there, what trends are like if you want to get published, and go read.
And you also learn so much from other writers. Like,
yes, absolutely.
Like reading is as a reader, right? As a writer, you read things and you go, oh yeah, that's how I can handle it that way, or it makes you think about your own work. I feel like you can't disconnect those two things.
Exactly, because sometimes you literally just read like one word in a sentence, and you're like, to me, and then like my brain will start firing off of just one word about something completely unrelated, and I'm like, oh, I just can't imagine like not having those experiences.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is dangerous to do when you are driving and listening to an audiobook, because then you're like, I've missed my turn and I don't know what's going on in the book, because my brain just wandered off to go follow that one word. I'm like, oh yeah. And then you're working on your own stuff. Yeah. And I love that. But I loved how Cora was handling it, because she was comparing herself and thinking, well, what are these people? What kind of story are they looking for? What are the expectations? And I felt that was still hyper relevant now, because okay, so she was looking to enter a particular story contest and feeling that imposter syndrome, and am I a real writer? And part of the thing that I thought was very interesting about how you handled this, she's not telling her husband that she's doing any of this, and she doesn't. And I'm just like, my husband does not always have the most enthusiastic support, because the industry is so mean and is like, why are you doing this to yourself, and why don't you go do something else now? But the idea of not talking to him about it and not telling him what I'm doing, I had such a hard time with that, because I understand that things were very different, and his ideas about why she would be doing that and why is she wasting her time or doing all this, but she didn't even tell him and give him the opportunity to talk. So what was the choice there about not having Cora tell Earl, the jazz musician, so someone who's already an artist, what she's doing?
Couple things. One, is I'm assuming that for the most part, in the Black community, I think it wouldn't have been something that was honored. Do you know what I mean? For her to be doing that. And even if you think about the difference between us as a writer and maybe someone who's a musician, even today, if you are, if you play the guitar and you can go at the local club or whatever, even like there's a little restaurant that's downtown from where we live, and you can, like, they have open bars, you can just like do your thing. It's different than, toiling away on a novel for 10, 15 years and nothing happening with it. It feels like it's not as tangible, I think, in some ways. I mean, or even if you are talented musician and you are in the, you're a Christian in the Black community, then you can sing in the choir or play the piano or be a music director or whatever. Whereas the writer is something that is like, what are you doing? So that's part of it. And then the other part of it is, I think maybe it was fear on her part that by telling him, he might have confirmed that she was wasting her time. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Oh, and I feel that because I've gotten that feeling like you get the outside verification that yes, you're wasting your time, and then you need beyond that verification that you're not. And I liked how kind of Langston and her husband, who actually kind of knew each other but didn't know that they knew each other through that, played off different parts where one's encouraging, even if not always perfectly encouraging, but is telling her it's worthwhile and to keep going, and one she's too afraid to tell what she's doing. So,
well, and also I think that there probably would have been, I mean, he is a man and is the 1920s, this expectation that, she had to work because that was part of how they, paid their bills or whatever. But aside from that, like, this is his wife and she should be taking care of the kids. And
he did ask her, there's, a part in the book where he's like, well, who is going to make me supper? How is the laundry going to get done?
Right.
And I will say, I'm like very kind of thinking about doing a writing retreat in 2025.
You need to do it.
I'm going to do it. And my husband was like, can I go? Was his first question. I was like, well, it's a writing retreat. So what would you do when I was in class all morning and then writing all afternoon? And he's like, oh yeah, I guess you're right. And then he was like, how am I going to eat? He said the same thing. And I'm like, it's 2024.
DoorDash, friend.
Jennifer, if you need to ship Roman here,
and I ship him something,
him like one of my children and give him some nuggets, I will do that to make that happen. Because I'm
sure for 2 weeks he'll be fine.
As a wife and mother, like even now, like my children are adults and they're out of the house. But if I travel, I have to make the plans for the dog. Do you know what I mean? I have to make sure that right, like whatever is going, if there's something that hasn't happened with the house, those are things that fall to me. And is my husband capable of doing that? Absolutely. Runs, a third of the country for his company. I'm pretty sure he can handle that, but he doesn't.
Yeah, well, it's that whole emotional labor, and that's absolutely one of those things where emotional labor, and you show it both through Cora, but also Cora and her extended family obligations. This whole thing starts with her working someplace she normally doesn't work, so a relative doesn't lose their job when they get injured, and it's like, why is it on her to have to? Because that's what families do. Like, that's what you do. And the idea, like, well, wait a second, why does this fall to her? There are a lot of things that fall to the women in the family to keep the larger extended families from crumbling. And
I think it's like something we inherit from our mothers, and our mothers inherited it from their mothers. And we end up, it's kind of expected.
Yeah.
And it's like, especially now, like, we're not outright told we necessarily have to do all of those things, but at the same time, I'm like, well, if I didn't do the laundry, like, would any of the laundry get done? It
won't. I know that for a fact for me, because I had a very interesting wake up. Well, not a wake up because I was under anesthesia when I had surgery last year, and we were able to get things taken care of while I was hospitalized. And right now I'm reading a thesis for a friend, and people are like, well, you should be charging. I'm like, his family watched my kids while I was in surgery and got them to school. I owe him for life. It's fine. I will read all your theses, whatever. I will read his papers. But the idea when I came home, I'm finding the dishes did not get done. No laundry got done. It's like I literally was under anesthesia and no one could do a dish. No, but the kids got fed. So I'm at least like no one didn't feed the children.
That's all.
They're not like, we didn't eat while you were gone, mommy. Can we have your hospital jello? It's terrible. You don't want it. But that whole thing that falls to the women in the family. And I don't have women around me really to support that. So it does all fall to me because there isn't somebody else to do it.
Yeah. And I think, you know, in terms of Earl in the book, I wanted him to be realistic. In terms of how it might have hit. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think, you know, women today, and for me specifically, my husband's always been very, very supportive of, you know, my writing journey in terms of supporting the book or Minerva Rising. Like all of that is very, he's always been very supportive of that. But then there is the reality that there's still the family, the kids, all of that stuff still fell to me, even in the midst of doing those other things. Yeah.
So this book, Cora's Kitchen, came out in 2022. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on now before we go?
I can. I am working on a story that was sort of, I'm calling it folklore in my family, but
there were air quotes there, Kimberly. What were the air quotes for?
I'm using that word very liberal, in the most elastic way possible.
I like it.
But it's going to be a multi-generational story about a woman who finds out about her father after 45 years of not knowing anything. So she meets a long distance sister who was born like 8 days or so after, or they're about 8 days apart. And so the story will be partially set in the 60s, partially set in current time.
Oh, nice.
So awesome. it's so that's a little bit it's funny. I was talking to somebody about it yesterday, and it occurred to me that writing about the 60s is actually history. And I'm like,
it is.
We had an author on last year or the year before who wrote a book that took place in the 60s, and she was shocked when somebody's like, "Oh, it's historical fiction," and she's like, "No, it's not. It's about when I was growing up." And then she's like, "Oh no!"
That was So Happy Together, and we that was Deborah Shepard, right? And we loved that book, and we're like, "Yeah, it's historical fiction." She's just like rude, and didn't it end up getting shelved to like historical erotica? And she's like, "Wait a second, that was not in the book either." But it was very funny because you never know what they're going to do with your book once it's out of your hands, where they're going to put it. And she was just like very offended. She's like, "I am not old enough to be historical." We're like, kind of we are. Even the 80s is getting considered like historical fiction. I don't know when that line starts happening, but when our kids have that dress up day at school, you know it's past, you know?
Absolutely.
No, that's making me feel really super old. Don't do it.
Yeah. I was thinking, you know, because I like historical fiction, and I was thinking, well, I don't know if I wanted to do I wanted to move forward, but then like the 60s, it's like you said, that's been 60 years.
Oh God, don't say it like that.
Well, I mean, I was born in that time period, so, and I'm coming up on that birthday, so yeah.
Well, and I wonder if it's the line of, because it wouldn't work for the 60s if the idea of the people who are primarily the adults then are no longer alive. Is that when it becomes historical? Because you're talking about people who aren't alive anymore to tell you that's not right. Do you have to have like no one can contradict you for it to be historical fiction? I lived it. That's wrong.
Well, I think it's about kind of, maybe it's when you've got the distance to be able to look at it more abstractly, you know what I mean, in terms of
as a time period, and then what the ramifications were.
Right.
I actually was a history minor. I don't actually know if I got the last class. I was a poli-sci major with a lot of history classes because I didn't have that horrible professor who made me hate the Renaissance. But I was American history, which was mostly like it kind of corresponded with a lot of the politics stuff until I took a game theory class that required me to know advanced calculus. And I said, I'm not doing this. And then I took politics of France, and that was completely useless. But Annie says she just bought Cora's Kitchen. Thank you for this. I would love this. So, Annie, once you get your copy, assuming you have a physical copy, we'll need one of these. So you can, we'll post that there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Annie.
Hi, Chella.
Hi, Chella. We have amazing writers watching us today.
Yeah, we have like the educated women crew coming on going, yes, I heard my name called.
Exactly. I think they heard feminist, women's literary. They heard those words.
Dad, like,
and it was like, oh.
They showed up.
So Kimberly, thank you so much for being here with us today. You will have to come back whenever the next book is out. And
we're going room with Jennifer on that writers conference because I can't.
It's in Greece.
Kimberly's like, tell me more.
I know. I'm like, it's in Greece.
I would go just for the food, but again, no one's gonna be watching my children at that point. So I'm like, when they have it in like 10 years and my 8-year-old is 18, we'll talk.
We'll go back to Greece.
Or somewhere. I'll go anywhere.
Anywhere. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in live. If you're watching us on our replay, thank you as well. Make sure if you are on YouTube, hit subscribe. And we'll see everybody in a couple weeks. Chella.
Hi, Chella.
Thank you, ladies.
Cora's Kitchen, Kimberly Garrett Brown.